Okay, welcome back, dear viewers. We are going to get back into the deep dive with Alien RPG. Before we get started, though, the obligatory, if you like what you see here, please hit like and subscribe, and the bell icon, yada 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 statement has to come, right? What I do here is I play games, I record myself playing games, and then I talk about them. Got nothing against a flip through review, but I find that sometimes reading a module or an RPG or a supplement is more fun than actually using it. I don't get a whole lot out of the flip through reviews. So with that said, let's get started. All right, got to get our mood music right. Last time I talked about combat, damage, the basics of that. And now we're going to get into what I think is the strongest aspect of this game, and it's stress and panic, and how it handles stress and panic, and why I just think it's superior to some of the other like insanity mechanics that are out there. Um, and I hope you feel the same way, actually. So I'm going to start with a quote from the book. The mounting tension in your character is measured by their stress level. I think this right here highlights part of why I think this is a superior mechanic to the insanity mechanic to Call of Cthulhu. Nothing against Call of Cthulhu. It's been around for a long time. It is very fun to play, but I find the insanity hit point, mental hit point type mechanic to be somewhat counterproductive to like the immersive experience. Um, in that mechanic, you're taking damage and you're subtracting from your sanity level. Where this mechanic, you gain stress and like it's almost like watching a meter on your character sheet get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it grows and grows and grows, and that as you're watching this, I think on your character sheets, I think that actually creates a little bit of anxiety in your mind as a player, um, coupled with the fact that as your stress increases, your dice pool increases. So when you're rolling dice, it gets louder. I mean, there's a real visceral thing that happens, and I think this is genius. The mechanics of the game and what it represents in the immersive world seems to have transcended and actually breached into the really real world. Um, and in a way that I really haven't seen anywhere else. I've run this game a couple of times, and when players are starting to panic and they have high stress, like there's definitely some oh shit moments going on at the table, some frustration when they're just panicking and they can't win, quote unquote, right? Um, but then afterwards, after the game, they've had a lot of fun because they've actually been scared, and I think that's really just the success of this game mechanic. So, as you can see, you gain stress in a certain number of ways. When you push a skill roll, we kind of talked about that a few episodes ago. That's when you fail at a skill roll, or maybe you want more successes on a skill roll, so you re-roll the dice. But when you do that, you gain stress, which means you add a dice to the dice pool. Whenever you fire a burst of auto fire from a weapon, that causes stress. When you take damage, when you go without sleep, food, or water, when you try to kill someone. I really like this. A scientist in your team fails to use the analysis talent. The analysis talent allows the scientist to ask a series of questions to the game master, and the game masters respond truthfully as to what the scientist has analyzed, usually about an alien life form. So when the scientist fails, their response is, I don't know what this is. And that, if you think about that, in the midst of like a horror, sci-fi horror, when you're encountering some sort of alien creature and the scientist you're looking to for answers says, I don't have any answers. I mean, that can add stress. So I really like that. When you get attacked by your own crew, and I like this too, when a person nearby is revealed to be an android. That's one of the themes in the universe, alien universe. If you've ever played Alien Isolation, fantastic game. Came out a few years ago. There's these androids called the Working Joes. They look like androids. They're built by Seegson, a rival company to Weyland-Yutani, and their whole promotion is, you know, that our androids are not human, so you don't ever have to worry. You don't have to have any paranoia. Of course, the Working Joes are creepy in their own right. So, but anyway, and then of course there's like this little extra, like certain creatures or locations or encounters is determined by the scenario or the GM can add stress. So there's a little discretion built into this game mechanic too. So, whenever you make a skill roll, when you have stress, you have to add to your base dice pool separate dice called the stress dice. And there, again, there's a separate thing you can buy from Free League. They're yellow. Instead of a 1, it's a face hugger. And if you roll a 1, you have to make a panic roll. The interesting thing here, though, is if you roll a 6 on those dice, you still succeed. It still counts as a success. So that kind of demonstrates that sometimes in high stress situations, you're laser focused and you could actually succeed as a result of your stress. And that's why pushing your dice pools can be beneficial. Okay, so you've panicked. You make a roll, right? So when do you have to do this? Well, like I said, when you roll a 1 or a face hugger. Sometimes when you witness a friendly character suffering from a certain panic effect, that's on a chart. When you're pinned down by a rage attack. Now, if you remember, when you have successes on an attack, you can do extra damage or you can pin someone down so they can't move. That causes stress. Just think again, cinematically, you're in a firefight, you see some of the guys go down behind cover and they're just getting blasted at it, and there's like all this tension and near panic in their eyes as they're trying to figure out what to do next. You suffer a critical injury is stressful. You're attacked by an alien. And then again, there's some discretion as determined by the DM as to, whether or not the player should be rolling for panic. So basically, you just roll a d6 and add your current stress level. If you roll a 10 or higher, you're going to be forced to perform a specific action. If you were making a skill check, the action is canceled and immediately replaced by the forced panic action. In one of the games I ran many years ago, I think it was at the start of the pandemic actually, the pilot, he just kept panicking. He couldn't do anything, so he just kept running. He was getting kind of frustrated. I thought it was hilarious, but if you're certain panic effects, typically a 7 or higher, will force to make other players make a roll, or new effects may replace the old effects. Basically, if you're forced to make more panic rolls while you're panicking and it's a weaker effect, you automatically adjust the current effect to the next higher one. So it's not like if you rolled lower, you're gonna become less panic. No, that actually gets added on. There is also an interesting talent that can be taken. It's called Overkill. If you roll 11 or higher on your panic roll, you can opt to use the Overkill talent if you have it on your character sheet. And that basically is like you go into a berserker rage and you just start shooting everybody. And you won't stop until you're broken. That scene from Aliens where Hudson loses it and he just starts shouting, "Come get some!" and he's just shooting crazy, and as they're escaping into the armored personnel carrier, that to me is an example of that overkill mechanic. However, while you're doing that, your friends that are in close range will have to make panic rolls because you're losing it. Here's the panic roll chart. You can see, if you roll a 10, you freeze in fear, right? If you're rolling 11, you see cover. You might scream, flee, berserk, catatonic. That's where you just collapse, and But if you roll a 1 through 6, you keep it together. You panicked, but you can still keep the skill roll that you're working on. Okay. To stop panic, basically another character has to come to your aid and make a command roll. That's a slow action. you become broken. You're no longer panicked. You're on the ground bleeding out or something. Or one turn passes. So if it's not an immediate effect and 10-15 minutes goes by, the panic stops. Okay, you still have your stress, but you're no longer fleeing. You're no longer berserking or whatever. Um, to relieve stress, you basically have to find a safe area and rest for full turn, and that will reduce your stress level by one. Once per game session or act, if you're doing a cinematic scenario, you can interact with your signature item, which is a slow action, and that will reduce your stress by one. So if you have like a favorite hat, your character has a favorite hat, you might take it off and give yourself a moment. You take it off and you like reminisce about how you got this hat or something, and it kind of calms you down. Um, if you roll a 13 or more on a panic roll, you'll trigger an immediate empathy roll after the session, assuming your character survives, of course. And if you succeed, you have a permanent mental trauma. The empathy checks in this game are kind of interesting too. Sometimes you actually want to fail them as a sign of your humanity. NPCs in panic, they never roll. This is more of the story game aspect of this system. The the GM will have NPC panic if they feel it's appropriate. I'm not sure if I like that coming from an OSR perspective, but again, if you're trying to create a high tense situation, maybe you do want a screaming or catatonic NPC who's flipping out. You know. Okay, so there are other hazards that the game, addresses, which I'll just start talking to in a minute here. But that's panic. It's pretty simple, and like I said, you will if when you use it, you will see some really interesting things happen at your gaming table as your players are going to like they'll actually start getting nervous as their stress starts mounting. It's quite amazing to watch. I've never seen anything like that really happen, and I've played Call of Cthulhu on more than one occasion. Um, so I think checking this game out just for that experience alone is worth it. So all right, so what I do like about this game too is they try to make space dangerous, and it should be. Um, so you can suffer the effects of lack of food, dehydration, exhaustion, freezing, other kinds of things, hazards and obstacles can affect you. Um, and all of these conditions will have an adverse effect on your character, recovering health or relieving stress. Um, as you can see here, you could take damage if you're not eating or drinking, and it's not just the point of health damage, but you also gain stress while this is happening. Um, and some of this stuff wears off the moment you get the food or the water immediately. Exhaustion's kind of interesting though. If it's a cumulative penalty to the roll the longer you stay awake, and then if you fail, you just collapse for a full shift, which is 6 to 10 hours. Um, collapse from exhaustion. So that's interesting to me. Freezing, deep space. They have three different categories of freezing. Like if you're just above, you're on like a planet that's just above freezing, you got to make a roll once a day. If you're in sub-zero temperatures, you roll every shift. If you're in the cold of deep space, you roll every turn. So like if you're on a ship and life support goes out, that's not good. Very cool. Now I also like the vacuum rules. There's an actual full paragraph that explains what happens to your body when you're like sucked out of airlock. Um, it's bad. You don't want it to happen. But basically, every round you're making a stamina roll, and it's cumulative -1 to the roll until you fail, and you just immediately drop to 0 hit points, and you have to start making death rolls until you die, or you enter a pressurized area. You don't suffer any critical injury, which I don't necessarily agree with that. If you ever seen the movie Event Horizon, well, number one, you should see it. Number two, there's a scene where a dude gets shot out an airlock and he gets rescued, and he's in serious he's got some serious problems. Like he's in the med bay for a good long time. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think your character should have some long term effect. Um, they also have like basically tell you what to do if there's a spacesuit available for a character. Um, Basically, they have to make a successful mobility roll to climb in it in order to save themselves while in the vacuum. Explosive decompression. Um, this is I'm glad they put this in here because I was running a campaign and shots started firing in the middle of a space station, and I was shocked when the players just decided to open up on this cultist, and I did the Gary Gygax thing. I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? You know, you're on a space station, and they're like, yeah, we got to shoot him. So like, okay, well, the moment the first one missed, I go, okay, you got to make a hull check. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're shooting a projectile in a space station surrounded by the dark void of space. You have a chance of puncturing the hull. Like silence dropped, and they're like, oh, yeah. I'm like, yeah, oh, all right. Fortunately for them, there wasn't any explosive decompression. But this is interesting. Like before you do anything in a situation like this, you have to make a stamina roll to see if you can actually move because the explosive decompression is keeping you from doing anything. You know, all this air is being sucked out. So if you're trying to get to that spacesuit, first thing you need to do is make that stamina roll to see if you can move, and then you can get into the spacesuit. I really like that. All right, typical falling damage. They allow armor to absorb some of the damage. I don't know if I like that, but it is what it is. Um, and yeah, if it's a controlled jump, you can make a mobility roll to reduce the damage. Explosions. It's just basically, you know, if you're within the area effect, the explosion has sort of like a ranking, and then you roll a number of dice equal to that rank, and for every success, you know, that's a point of damage. Um, there's no chart to sort of rank what the explosion does, though, so you're going to have to kind of figure that out on your own, okay, if you want to. And it's the same thing with fire, too. They just say a typical fire has an intensity of 8. Well, what's a candle? Is that like a 1? You know? I don't know. I guess that's what I would rule and just kind of go up from there, I suppose. But yeah, you can take damage, you can catch fire, and then you have to basically make a mobility roll to put out the flames. You can have a friend help you. What's interesting is the intensity will increase each round. So if there is a fire breakout on your ship, or you get caught on fire and you don't put out the fire the next round, that intensity 8, for example, is going to become an intensity 9, and you just might burn to death. So it's kind of unforgiving. So and remember, your health score is equal to your strength. So most people are going to have 2 or 3 health. So this can be very lethal, or at least get you to the stage where you're broken. And then there's I think the equivalent of 17% chance of rolling death on the critical injury chart. I think that's what it is. So yeah, this could definitely take you out. And if you do survive, you know, you're going to be requiring medical aid and whatnot. Similar to explosions and fire, there's a disease condition, and again, they don't really give you any insight on how to make these diseases. You know, they just say typical virulence rating is a 3, but this is like an opposed roll. Your stamina check versus the disease, and if you fail, you get infected, and then you can take damage every shift if you fail the roll. But the moment you succeed, you're no longer sick. Okay, and someone with medical aid can actually do the roll for you using their medical aid to help you from getting sick. And then there's sort of a statement that says, you know, the rules here are just standard deadly diseases. If per the game master's discretion, they can come up with their own, you know, effects, which is which is nice. But again, I kind of wish there was a little bit more here to help me stay sort of within the realm of the Year Zero game engine. But I suppose with some experimentation with all these sort of rules, you can figure it out yourself. I wrote an adventure in my campaign where there was a disease. It was more of a bacteria hiding in these underground lakes that would occasionally heat up and turn into mist, and it would erupt out into the atmosphere, and it ended up, infecting the population. And I think I used a variance rating of 5 because it was a very aggressive bacteria. The players never went down to the planet's surface, though, so they never had to deal with it. But anyway, so then radiation. I'm really glad they put this in because I think this is another interesting thing that can happen to your players, especially if you're doing ship-to-ship combat, which I'll address in another video. If something happens to your, engine core, I mean, radiation is going to be leaking all over the place. So, and as you can see, this is similar to stress. Like, you start collecting rads, and depending on how strong the radiation is, it could be 1 per shift, 1 per turn, 1 per round. And every time you gain a radiation point, you have to roll a number of dice equal to your total current number of accumulated rads, and for every success you take a point of damage. Okay, and eventually you can break and become, and die, but you cannot recover any health while you're in the hot spot. So that's something you can consider. Like, maybe the players are exploring a planet that's awfully close to the star, and maybe there's just weak radiation because of the, proximity. Well, players are going to have a hard time healing unless they get inside their little, colony constructed pods or housing, in order to get away from the radiation. But if they're out exploring, they're going to be in trouble, right? What's really cool, though, is it's possible to get permanent radiation. And you have to roll a single stress die. If a 1 is rolled, the rad is permanent when you're trying to heal these rads. So that's no good. You could be sick for a long time. They, of course, have rules for drowning and suffocation. Suffocation is an accumulative penalty each round when your air supply runs out. I would probably, just to be a jerk, I guess, make things really hard, I'd probably do vacuum and suffocation at the same time. I mean, because you're not breathing in the vacuum of space. And then drowning is interesting. I mean, basically, whether you're voluntarily or involuntarily going underwater, you have to make a stamina roll. It's not an action. It's just something you got to do. And if you fail, you take a point of damage and you start to drown. So yeah, that's it. Okay, so I put this image. I can't remember where I got it from, but it's the Working Joe. As they're really creepy looking. I really recommend you guys play that game if you haven't. It's fun. I might consider starting that game up and maybe streaming it. That might be fun to do on a Saturday night. I don't know. But I put this up there to talk about synthetics and their special rules. So, kind of talked a little bit about synthetics. They have better attributes than humans. After you divvy up your points, they get to pick 2 and add 2 attributes and add 3 to them. So you can have a super strong one, like a combat one. You can have one that's more of a scientist and calculator, or if you want to be really creepy, you can have one that's very good at mimicking being human and up the empathy. Skills and stress, they do not push skill rolls. Thus, they don't suffer stress. They don't have stress level, and they never make panic rolls. So if you're ever playing the game of Alien and there's just one player who's always calm, cool, and collective when the shit's hitting the fan, you might want to get a little paranoid. You might have a Weyland-Yutani synthetic in your group. You better hope they don't, go nuts. Because damage to a synthetic is different. They actually take damage very similarly to monsters and creatures. So NPCs take damage the exact same way as PCs. They can become broken and suffer critical injuries, or if the GM wants it, they can just die. Okay. What happens with a synthetic is they have their own critical hit chart, which I have here for you to look at, and duplicate rolls actually shift down one. So if you roll two severe chassis breaches, you roll down. The next one is just head dislocation. Okay. Androids don't heal. They need a shift of work and a contact roll to repair all lost health and critical injuries, and they cannot repair themselves. So you actually have to have someone help you out. Androids don't die. They suffer from system shutdown, but they can be revived with a turn of work, so 15 minutes, a power source, and a contact roll. And then from there, they can be repaired. However, the synthetic will suffer a mental trauma, so that's interesting. And if you remember from the first movie, Alien, Ripley put together Ash, and started talking to the head. That's kind of like what happened here. And then, of course, synthetics don't require to make any resource rolls for food, water, air, and they're immune to the vacuum of space, diseases, and cold effects. But they can still be set on fire, that kind of thing. So, that's synthetics, and this is what you would be playing if you played a synthetic in a game. These would be your special rules for playing that character. The next entry in this book, the last entry for this section, is actually on the xenomorph. I'm going to do that separately because there's in another section of the book there's an entire bestiary dedicated to the xenomorph, and so I'm just going to combine those two sections when I present them. And that's another issue I have. I think I mentioned this once before. The layout of this book is just doesn't fully make sense to me. Maybe it's just the way I think and they think differently. I don't know, but it's sometimes I feel like I'm flipping through pages when I shouldn't have to. But anyway, that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, if this is what you like, what I'm offering, please hit like and subscribe and the bell icon. Let me know in the comments below, that if there's anything you want me to check out or talk about. I think I'm going to do the xenomorphs next, and then I'm going to talk about cinematic play versus campaign play. I mean, I could go into space combat and stuff, but I kind of want to talk about this stuff first, because this gets to the heart of my criticisms of this game. But anyway, I'll figure that out next week. Though you'll get my answer. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. Hit like and subscribe. Maybe share the video, and I will talk to you guys later. Take care.